Consider this: a nation that every expert said couldn't survive, a nation outgunned, outnumbered, and pressured to hand over its own territory before a single peace negotiator had even taken a seat. That same nation just delivered a strike directly into the core of Russia's ballistic missile production program from over 400 kilometers away, with missiles it designed and built in secret while under relentless bombardment. That happened last week. And that's only the starting point of everything we're going to cover today. Welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, this is where the real story gets told. The tactics, the technology, the geopolitical dynamics that most coverage simply doesn't have the depth or time to unpack. Subscribe now, because what is unfolding on the battlefield at this moment is moving faster than the news cycle can keep up with. Today we are examining one of the most remarkable weeks in the entire course of this war. Multiple simultaneous operations, gains across the southern front, a dramatic reversal on the northern line, deep strike missions executed inside Russian territory, and a Ukrainian missile that has now demonstrated it can reach anywhere from Moscow to the Ural Mountains. Zelensky said it himself just days ago, and his words deserve careful attention. We have now reached a turning point that could change the fate of the war. You've heard similar declarations before, but today, once you see what actually unfolded across 4 or 5 entirely distinct fronts at the same time, you'll understand why this time those words carry genuine weight. Where it all started: Zaporizhia, the southern front. Let's begin at ground zero, the place where the chain reaction was ignited: Zaporizhia, the southern front. Over the past 2 weeks, Ukrainian armed forces liberated dozens of villages across this region. Every one of those villages represents a collapsed Russian defensive line. But here is what made this counteroffensive fundamentally different from anything seen since the Kharkiv Lightning campaign of 2022. The breakthrough didn't originate from a single direction. It came from everywhere simultaneously. Ukrainian forces pushed northwest of Verbov. They relieved Russian pressure around Stepov. They liberated 8 additional settlements in the Oleksandrivka direction. Then Ukrainian units began pushing toward the village of Kalanki, initiating direct engagement. This entire cascade of movement was verified by the Institute for the Study of War, the Ukrainian General Staff, multiple open-source intelligence accounts, and international media. Geolocated footage, satellite imagery, and local reporting all pointing to the same conclusion. Russia's defensive architecture in the south was fracturing. Now let's talk numbers, because numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Maps published by ISW showed Ukrainian-controlled territory covering Verbove, Kopani, Nova, and Kalanki. The total area of gains cited by Zelensky reached approximately 300 square kilometers. Let that register for a moment. 300 square kilometers retaken in 2 weeks. Here is why that figure is remarkable. Remember Ukraine's Kursk incursion in the summer of 2024. Within the first week of that operation, Ukrainian forces seized roughly 250 to 300 square kilometers of Russian territory, an advance that stunned the world by occurring inside Russia itself. The Russians are now experiencing that same scale of territorial collapse inside their own occupation zone in southern Ukraine. The roles have inverted. The map is blue where Russia assumed it would remain red, and none of this was accidental. This is the product of a deliberate, layered operational strategy. Defense Forces spokesperson Vladislav Voloshin explained the mechanics. Ukrainian troops were executing counterattacks and offensive operations across Zaporizhia Oblast simultaneously. Control was re-established across multiple settlements along the boundary of the Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups were eliminated. Gray zones were being compressed. This was not improvised chaos. This was orchestrated precision. Ukraine's airborne elite. Behind these southern advances was a force that tends to be underreported: Ukraine's air assault forces, its airborne elite. The Ukrainian air assault forces officially confirmed a major ongoing offensive along the Oleksandrivka axis. This was a deliberately designed high-risk mission to disrupt Russia's plans to push into both Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia oblasts. The operation was commanded by Air Assault Forces Commander General Ole Apostol, and it incorporated two of Ukraine's most decorated brigades, the 82nd Bukovina and the 95th Airborne, both operating at an extremely high operational tempo. The battlefield was described as, in their own words, extremely dynamic. Despite intense Russian resistance and the deployment of significant enemy reserves thrown into the gap, Ukrainian paratroopers maintained the initiative. They repelled Russian counterattacks. They kept advancing. This was sustained pressure from elite units against an enemy already stretching its reserves dangerously thin. And that stretching of Russian reserves is itself a critical development. According to ISW analysis from February 2026, reserves from Russia's western grouping of forces had been redirected north to contain Ukrainian counterattacks near Kupiansk, leaving them unavailable to reinforce operations in the south. Ukraine was simultaneously pulling Russian forces in two opposing directions. This is operational art at its finest. The Spartan Brigade. This story deserves its own moment. National Guard soldiers within this elite unit executed a precision operation, targeting Russian infantry and armor in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The objective was a Russian military convoy traveling along a key logistical route used to supply Russian southern offensives. Russia's forces had been improvising, mounting weapon systems onto pickup trucks and ATVs, the kind of battlefield modifications you see from an army under constant attrition pressure. The convoy was moving. The Spartan Brigade intercepted it on the road. The entire column was destroyed before it reached its destination. One operation, one convoy, 0 survivors. These are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a Russian army running critically low on both equipment and morale along the southern axis. Then came the full accounting from Ukraine's SBU Alpha Special Forces. What Ukraine destroyed in just 1 week on the southern front alone: 3 tanks, 4 armored vehicles, 16 artillery systems, 4 multiple rocket launchers, 3 air defense systems, 2 electronic warfare systems, 231 vehicles, 227 drones, 17 robotic systems, 4 ammunition depots, 4 fuel depots, and over 2,000 Russian soldiers removed from the battlefield. That is not a setback for Russia. That is a catastrophe for Russian force projection in the south. The Northern Front, Kupiansk. The fire that ignited in Zaporizhzhia didn't stay there. It spread, and when it reached the Kupiansk front, roughly 300 kilometers to the north, it produced one of the most tactically stunning results of the entire war. Ukrainian forces advanced toward Vovchansk under the cover of the Siversky Donets River. They isolated and completely destroyed an entire Russian battalion. Not degraded, not scattered, destroyed. As a coherent fighting unit, that battalion ceased to exist. Joint Forces Task Force spokesman Viktor Trihub delivered the assessment with cold precision. Russian forces in Kupiansk, he said, controlled less than 3% of the city. Only a few dozen soldiers remained, sheltering in scattered buildings. Not fighting, surviving, trapped north and east of Kupiansk beyond the Oskil River, with no realistic prospect of reinforcement. ISW confirmed this picture in its February 23, 2026 assessment, noting Ukrainian advances near both Kupiansk and Oleksandrivka. Russian military bloggers, typically reluctant to acknowledge bad news, were openly criticizing their own command for filing false reports about seized territory. One blogger explicitly stated that a Russian flag appearing in a settlement does not constitute control. Control only exists when the front line has moved tens of kilometers further forward. By that standard, Russia controls almost nothing in Kupiansk. The 116th Independent Mechanized Brigade added to Russia's difficulties by destroying a vehicle, an ATV, and a mortar crew, stripping mobility and fire support from units that already had almost none. Then came the drone strike on a Russian ammunition depot in the South Slobitsky direction of Kharkiv Oblast. Operators from the Heart Brigade located it. They flew a drone directly through a window. Even depots concealed inside forests or village structures were found, penetrated, and detonated. Ukraine did not stumble into these results. It hunted them. The strategic picture. Here is where the picture expands in ways even experienced analysts are struggling to fully absorb. These operations were not simply about recapturing villages. They were telegraphing a strategic signal that Ukraine will not surrender Donbass, will not accept partition, will not yield a single meter of sovereign territory under external pressure. Zelensky stated this plainly in his Munich speech on February 18th. The war began in the east and in Crimea, and Ukraine will not yield on Donbass. Not now, not ever. To underscore that message, Ukrainian forces destroyed a Russian Tor air defense radar antenna positioned just 1 kilometer from occupied Donetsk, a system specifically designed to intercept UAVs. Ukraine found it. Ukraine killed it. On the night of February 22nd, 2 Russian defensive strongholds near Donetsk and Mariupol were destroyed, and then came the oil depot strike in Luhansk. This was not a random target. The depot was supplying fuel to Russia's 41st and 20th Combined Arms Armies operating in eastern Ukraine. FPV drones located it and hit it. The footage showed massive secondary explosions, a column of smoke visible for kilometers. The depot was full when it was struck. Chain reactions tore through it. In operational terms, that means, without fuel, tank units stop moving, armored vehicles stop moving, artillery fires less frequently, logistics convoys slow down. Every liter of fuel that burned in that depot is a Russian capability that no longer exists on the Eastern Front. This is how modern war is actually won, not only by eliminating soldiers, but by systematically destroying the systems that keep an army functional. The flamingo has landed. But this is where this particular week transcends everything covered before, because Ukraine did not stop at the occupied territories. Ukraine reached deep into Russia itself and struck targets the Kremlin believed were permanently beyond reach. On the night of February 20th to 21st, 2026, Ukraine's armed forces executed a strike that will almost certainly be studied in military academies for decades to come. Using domestically produced FP-5 Flamingo long-range cruise missiles, Ukraine struck the Votkinsk machine-building plant in Russia's Udmurt Republic. The plant is located more than 1,400 kilometers from Ukrainian territory. That is the longest-range strike Ukraine has ever executed. Let's establish what Votkinsk actually is, because this matters enormously. The Votkinsk plant is one of the most strategically critical facilities in Russia's entire military-industrial complex. It produces Iskander short-range ballistic missiles, the exact weapon Russia has been firing at Ukrainian cities for 3 years. It produces Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of reaching the United States. And according to multiple analysts, it is also suspected of producing the Oreshnik, Putin's supposedly invincible hypersonic system. This is not a peripheral facility. This is the factory that sustains Russia's entire ballistic missile arsenal. Ukrainian defense firm Firepoint, the company behind the Flamingo, confirmed the strike. Company co-owner Denis Silchenko had posted a cryptic video of a Flamingo launch on February 20th with only the caption, "No context, context later." The General Staff's confirmation the following morning provided the context. Ukraine's General Staff confirmed the destruction of Workshop Number 22 at the plant on February 20th, 2026. According to unconfirmed but credible reporting, Workshop 22 is the site of final missile assembly. A fire was recorded on the plant's territory. Missile expert Fabian Hoffmann, a doctoral researcher at the University of Oslo, specializing in missile technology and nuclear strategy, described this as, in paraphrase, the first time Ukraine has successfully struck a core target of Russia's missile industry directly using a heavy missile capability. Russia had surrounded this plant with trenches and fencing. It had radar coverage. It had air defenses. None of it was sufficient. Retired Lieutenant General Ihor Romanenko, speaking to Ukrainian media, put it this way: Ukraine is increasing production of these missiles. The defense industry is solving the targeting and security problem. The results speak for themselves. The full scope of the operation. Votkinsk was not an isolated strike. During the same coordinated operation, Ukraine simultaneously hit a gas processing plant in Russia's Samara Oblast, a fuel and lubricants warehouse in Russian-controlled Donetsk, a drone workshop near Nova Karakuba in Donetsk Oblast, and a military logistics depot in Polohi in the occupied portion of Zaporizhzhia Oblast. One night. One coordinated operation, multiple targets spread across thousands of kilometers, and the Flamingo had already been active. In January 2026, Ukraine used these same missiles to strike the Kapustin Yar test range in Russia's Astrakhan Oblast, the facility where Russia has been developing and testing the Oreshnik system. According to Ukraine's general staff, a number of hangar-type buildings sustained significant damage and part of the personnel was evacuated. Putin's most celebrated weapon, the one he unveiled with theatrical fanfare to intimidate the West, was struck where it sleeps. Earlier in February, Flamingo missiles had also struck the Grau ammunition depot near Kotlubin in Volgograd Oblast, one of the largest ammunition storage sites in Russia's southern logistics network. Powerful explosions, secondary detonations, and total destruction followed. The Flamingo's specifications: a range reportedly up to 3,000 kilometers, a warhead weighing approximately 450 kilograms, with mass production having begun in the winter of 2025 to 2026, targeting an output of 7 missiles per day. Even a Russian retaliatory strike on a Firepoint manufacturing facility, confirmed by Zelensky in a February 23 interview with German broadcaster Tagesschau, caused only a temporary interruption. Production resumed. More missiles were built. More are coming. The question, as analyst Hoffmann framed it, is not whether the Flamingo works. The question is how many Ukraine can produce and which targets it will prioritize next. Russia is now attempting to solve an equation it cannot solve. Its air defenses were architected to defeat Western missiles. They were not designed to stop a domestically produced Ukrainian cruise missile that costs a fraction of a Storm Shadow and can now apparently reach Moscow. Moscow under pressure. Speaking of Moscow, Ukraine launched approximately 100 unmanned aerial vehicles toward the Russian capital in a coordinated assault. The scale of the attack forced the simultaneous closure of all 4 of Moscow's major airports: Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo, and Zhukovsky. Flights were diverted. 200 flights were delayed or canceled. Moscow Mayor Sobyanin claimed 25 drones were intercepted. Yet the airports remained closed, and the airspace remained restricted. This was not Moscow's first experience of this in 2026. In January, Ukraine had launched multi-day drone campaigns against the Moscow region. On January 4th, 28 drones were shot down. On January 3rd, 29 were intercepted. Despite those interception numbers, airports were still forced to close repeatedly. Here is the strategic reality those numbers expose. Russia can shoot down drones, but the act of interception itself consumes money, missiles, radar capacity, and decision-maker attention, and it cannot stop all of them. Ukraine is not attempting to flatten Moscow with drones. Ukraine is compelling Russia to spend resources, disrupt its own economy, and continuously demonstrate to the Russian public that the war has arrived at their doorstep. Every canceled flight out of Moscow is a political statement. Every closed airport is a message. Deep rear strikes. One more operation deserves its own place in this account. On the evening of February 20th, Ukrainian forces attacked the Pugachevka airfield in Russia's Orenburg Oblast using long-range kamikaze drones. The result? One Mi-8AMS military transport helicopter destroyed and one Ka-52 attack helicopter destroyed. The Ka-52 is among Russia's most capable attack rotorcraft. Ukraine reached into Russia's deep rear and killed 2 of them on the ground. In Belgorod, the Frunzovskaya electrical substation in the Drakunsky district was struck. Residents reported powerful explosions. Widespread power outages swept through surrounding settlements and into Belgorod city itself. Russian air defenses were active for an extended period. Some drones were neutralized. Most reached their targets. In the Tver region, satellite imagery documented the aftermath of an attack on a chemical plant connected to the Iskra Niskom company, which produces plastic lubricants for the Russian Ministry of Defense. A workshop was destroyed. Russia is being struck simultaneously across its occupied territories, its border regions, its energy infrastructure, its military-industrial complex, and its capital's airspace. The full strategic picture. Let's step back and look at everything at once, because when all of these operations are mapped against each other, something extraordinary becomes visible. Ukraine is executing what military strategists call multi-domain convergence, simultaneous operations across the tactical, operational, and strategic levels, designed to overwhelm the enemy's decision-making capacity at every layer at the same time. At the tactical level, Zaporizhzhia, counteroffensives, Kupiansk encirclements, Donetsk stronghold destructions. At the operational level, coordinated strikes on fuel depots, ammunition depots, air defense systems, and logistics networks spanning thousands of kilometers. At the strategic level, Flamingo strikes on ballistic missile factories, ICBM test ranges, helicopter bases, and Moscow's airspace, designed to erode Russia's ability to wage this war at its very source. According to Euronews reporting from February 17th, ISW confirmed the main Ukrainian advance was recorded roughly 80 kilometers east of Zaporizhzhia city. ISW analysts also noted that Ukraine's counterattacks were being supported by a critical development. Russia's unauthorized use of Starlink terminals had been terminated as of February 1st. SpaceX, working with Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, implemented a whitelist system. Russian forces had been mounting Starlink receivers on attack drones to extend their range and precision. That capability was now gone. The timing of Ukraine's counteroffensive was not coincidental. Ukraine struck harder, faster, and deeper the moment Russia's drone networks went partially blind. The view from the Kremlin. Now let's look at Russia's position, because the view from inside the Kremlin has never been darker. 300 square kilometers of territory lost in the south, a city being recaptured in the north, ballistic missile factories burning in the Urals, helicopter bases struck in the deep rear, an ICBM test range damaged, Moscow's skies temporarily closed, and a network of Ukrainian drones and missiles that neither air defenses nor trenches around nuclear-capable factories have been able to stop. And here is the figure that should most alarm Moscow's war planners. According to ISW's February 15th assessment, Russian weekly territorial gains peaked at 141 square kilometers in late January. By the week of February 8th to 14th, they had already fallen to just 74 square kilometers, nearly halved. And that was before Ukraine's major counteroffensive moves were fully consolidated. The momentum had shifted before the world even noticed. Russia is expending enormous resources to advance at a walking pace through fields and minor settlements. Ukraine is directing those same resources toward destroying the factories that produce the weapons Russia uses to do that walking. The cost-exchange ratio of this war just shifted fundamentally. Complications and the peace process. It would be dishonest to pretend there are no complications in this picture. The peace negotiation situation remains thoroughly tangled. Talks in Geneva on February 17th and 18th ended once again in stalemate. The U.S. had proposed a joint Russian-Ukrainian civilian administration to oversee a demilitarized zone in Donbass. Ukrainian officials rejected it as both unrealistic and unacceptable. Russia continued pressing its maximalist demands: full cession of 4 oblasts, no NATO membership, and complete Ukrainian withdrawal from its own sovereign territory. Zelensky was direct when speaking to Tagesschau on February 23rd. Ukraine will continue developing the Flamingo. Ukraine will continue building its military-industrial capacity. And Ukraine understands that defeating Russia's layered air defenses requires combining mass drone attacks with heavy missile strikes. The exact same approach Russia has applied to Ukraine, now turned back on the aggressor. Zelensky also addressed the Oreshnik situation directly. Russia currently has 3 Oreshnik systems deployed on Russian territory. He said Ukraine can see them. Ukraine is working on the problem. Consider what that implies. The weapon Putin spent years presenting as unstoppable, the one he launched at Dnipro in November 2024 as a demonstration of Russian omnipotence, is now a system that Ukraine tracks, targets, and actively plans countermeasures against. Ukraine already struck its development range at Kapustin Yar in January. The Votkinsk plant that likely produces it was struck in February. Russia's most fearsome weapon is on Ukraine's targeting list. What comes next? ISW has assessed that Russian forces are at least several months away from being capable of launching any meaningful ground offensive from the north or east. Russia's western grouping reserves are already depleted by the Kupiansk crisis. Redeployments from other sectors would simply create new vulnerabilities, and Ukraine continues to degrade the logistics infrastructure any future Russian offensive would depend upon. Zelensky's political calculus is equally important to understand. He is signaling to Western partners, particularly an American administration that has been pressing for a negotiated settlement, that Ukraine does not need to negotiate from a position of weakness. Action by action, strike by strike, Ukraine is demonstrating it possesses the operational capacity to shape the conditions of any eventual agreement. Every factory destroyed, every depot detonated, every Russian battalion encircled strengthens Ukraine's hand at a negotiating table where Russia is still demanding maximum concessions. The momentum of this war is not fixed. It has shifted before. At Kyiv in 2022, at Kharkiv in late 2022, at Kherson in late 2022. It is shifting again now. The difference is that this time Ukraine is not merely defending or reconquering territory. It is reaching into the geographic interior of Russia and destroying the infrastructure of Russian military power itself. This is a new phase of the war. And here is the final truth that the view from inside the Kremlin makes impossible to deny. A war Russia launched believing it would be finished in 3 days. A war that has now consumed more than 4 years. A war in which the country Russia tried to erase from the map has developed its own cruise missiles, assembled its own drone armies, trained its own airborne assault forces, and is now striking targets deep inside Russian territory that Soviet-era military planners would have considered permanently invulnerable. Russia did not simply fail to win quickly. It created the precise conditions for its own long-term strategic erosion. The fire started in Zaporizhzhia. It is spreading. The coming days will be critical. The front remains fluid. More strikes are being planned. More Flamingo missiles are being built. Ukraine's operational tempo shows no sign of slowing. We will be tracking all of it, and we will bring you the complete breakdown as it develops. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit subscribe, enable notifications, and make sure you don't miss what comes next. Because if this week is any indication, what comes next will be extraordinary. Thank you for watching.